Welcome to the Humanized Books channel. Today's summary book is based on How to Analyze People by Scott Habets. You don't misunderstand people because they're complicated. You misunderstand them because you're listening to words instead of behavior. Every day, people reveal what they feel, what they fear, and what they want, not through what they say, but through habits, tone, posture, and small reactions they don't even notice. This audiobook is a complete breakdown of how to analyze people, not to manipulate, not to judge, but to see patterns clearly, avoid false assumptions, and understand what's really happening beneath the surface. If you've ever felt confused by people, this will change how you watch them. Introduction. Understanding people beyond words. The desire to understand people is as old as human interaction itself. Every day, we make judgments about others. Who to trust, who to avoid, who is confident, who is insecure, who is telling the truth, and who is hiding something. Most of the time, we do this instinctively, without knowing why. How to analyze people begins with a simple promise that human behavior follows patterns, and those patterns can be learned. In the author's introduction, the emphasis is not on manipulation, but on awareness. Understanding people is presented as a skill that improves communication, relationships, and self-knowledge. When we misread others, conflict increases. When we read them accurately, interactions become calmer and more effective. The book argues that people reveal far more than they intend to through body language, tone of voice, habits, and emotional reactions. Words are only a small part of communication. Much of what matters happens beneath conscious control. Facial expressions, posture, eye movement, pacing, and micro-reactions often tell a more honest story than spoken language. At the same time, the author cautions against simplistic interpretations. Human behavior is contextual. No single gesture or habit proves anything on its own. True analysis requires observing clusters of behavior over time, not jumping to conclusions based on one signal. Another important theme introduced early is self-awareness. Learning to analyze others also means learning to analyze yourself. Bias, projection, and emotional reactions can distort perception. The better you understand your own patterns, the clearer your view of others becomes. This book positions people analysis as a practical life skill. It applies to relationships, work environments, negotiations, friendships, and everyday encounters. The goal is not to control others, but to understand what motivates them, what they fear, and how they communicate without words. What follows is a structured guide to reading human behavior more clearly, calmly, and accurately. Chapter 1. The Foundations of People Analysis. Chapter 1 establishes the mindset required to analyze people accurately. The author makes it clear from the start that people analysis is not about guessing, labeling, or jumping to conclusions. It is about observation, patience, and pattern recognition. Most people believe they are good at reading others because they rely on intuition. The problem is that intuition is often shaped by bias, past experiences, and emotional reactions. In this chapter, the author explains that effective people analysis begins when intuition is slowed down and replaced with conscious observation. The first principle introduced is that behavior is communication. People are always communicating, even when they are silent. Posture, facial expressions, tone of voice, timing, and energy levels all carry information. The mistake most people make is listening only to words while ignoring everything else. The author emphasizes that no single behavior means anything by itself. Crossing arms does not automatically mean defensiveness. Avoiding eye contact does not automatically mean dishonesty. Context matters. Baseline behavior matters. What matters most is consistency and change. A baseline is how a person normally behaves when they are relaxed. Only by understanding someone's baseline can you detect meaningful deviations. For example, if a normally expressive person suddenly becomes quiet, that shift is more informative than silence alone. Likewise, if a reserved person becomes unusually animated, that change signals emotional engagement. The chapter also introduces the idea of clusters. Human behavior should be analyzed in groups, not in isolation. One gesture may mean nothing. Several aligned signals appearing together increase reliability. True analysis looks for repeated patterns across time and situations. Another key point is emotional neutrality. The author warns that strong emotional reactions distort perception. If you like someone too much, you overlook warning signs. If you dislike someone, you exaggerate flaws. Effective people analysis requires emotional distance. You observe first, interpret later. The chapter also turns the focus inward. Before analyzing others, you must recognize your own habits, triggers, and blind spots. Projection is a common error. People often assume others think, feel, or intend what they themselves would. Self-awareness reduces misinterpretation. The author closes the chapter by reframing people analysis as a skill rather than a talent. Some people appear naturally perceptive, but in reality, they have simply learned to notice details others ignore. With practice, anyone can improve their ability to read behavior accurately. The foundation is simple but demanding. Slow down, observe patterns, remove bias, and never rush to judgment. Everything else in the book builds on these principles. Chapter 2. Understanding Personality Types and Behavioral Patterns. Chapter 2 moves from general observation to deeper pattern recognition. The author explains that while every individual is unique, human behavior often follows recognizable structures. Personality types are not rigid boxes, but recurring tendencies shaped by temperament, experience, and coping strategies. The chapter begins by clarifying an important warning. Personality analysis should never be used to label or reduce people. Labels create blind spots. The goal is not to say, this is who they are, but to understand, this is how they tend to respond. The author introduces the idea that people develop dominant behavioral patterns as a way to navigate the world. These patterns are not always conscious. They are strategies formed over time to gain safety, approval, control, or connection. Once formed, they become default responses under stress. Several broad personality tendencies are discussed. Some people are externally focused and expressive. They think out loud, gesture freely, and process emotions through speech. Others are internally focused and reserved. They process privately, speak carefully, and reveal emotions slowly. Neither is better. Problems arise when one style is misinterpreted as the other. Another key distinction explored is task-oriented versus people-oriented behavior. Task-oriented individuals focus on outcomes, efficiency, and structure. People-oriented individuals prioritize harmony, emotion, and connection. Misunderstandings often happen when these styles collide. What one sees as directness, the other experiences as coldness. What one sees as empathy, the other interprets as inefficiency. The chapter also examines how personality shifts under pressure. Stress does not create new traits, it exaggerates existing ones. A confident person may become controlling. A cautious person may become withdrawn. Observing how someone behaves under mild stress reveals more than observing them when relaxed. The author emphasizes that personality patterns are context-dependent. A person may act dominant at work and passive at home. They may be expressive with friends and guarded with authority figures. True analysis considers environment, power dynamics, and emotional stakes. A major insight of this chapter is that behavior is adaptive. Even traits we judge negatively usually serve a purpose. Defensiveness protects vulnerability. Control reduces uncertainty. Humor diffuses tension. When you understand the function of a behavior, judgment gives way to insight. The chapter concludes by reminding the reader that people analysis improves relationships only when paired with flexibility. Understanding patterns allows you to adjust communication, avoid unnecessary conflict, and respond rather than react. The goal is not prediction, but comprehension. By learning to recognize behavioral tendencies without turning them into stereotypes, you gain a clearer, calmer view of human behavior. Chapter 3. Reading Body Language Beyond First Impressions. Chapter 3 focuses on one of the most misunderstood areas of people: analysis, body language. The author begins by dismantling a common myth. That body language works like a dictionary where one gesture equals one meaning. In reality, body language is fluid, contextual, and deeply connected to emotion and environment. The first principle emphasized is that the body reacts faster than words. People can control what they say, but their body often responds automatically to comfort, stress, interest, or threat. These reactions are usually subtle and brief, which is why careful observation matters more than dramatic gestures. The author explains that posture, movement, and physical orientation reveal emotional states. Open posture generally indicates comfort and engagement, while closed posture often signals tension or self-protection. However, context is essential. A person crossing their arms because of cold is very different from someone doing it during a tense conversation. Another key concept introduced is mirroring. When people feel comfortable or connected, they naturally mirror each other's movements, tone, and rhythm. This happens unconsciously. A lack of mirroring or a sudden break in it can indicate discomfort, disagreement, or emotional withdrawal. The chapter also explores micro-adjustments, small changes in body position that occur when emotions shift. Leaning back slightly, turning feet away, adjusting clothing, or touching the face can signal a change in internal state. These movements are most meaningful when they appear suddenly or repeatedly. Eye behavior receives special attention. The author cautions against the simplistic belief that avoiding eye contact means dishonesty. Eye movement is influenced by culture, personality, and emotional intensity. What matters more is change. A person who normally maintains eye contact but suddenly avoids it during a specific topic is providing valuable information. Hand movements are discussed as indicators of comfort and confidence. Relaxed, visible hands often accompany openness. Hidden or tense hands may suggest anxiety or caution. Again, clusters matter more than individual signals. The author also highlights the importance of baseline behavior in body language analysis. Without knowing how someone typically moves and expresses themselves, interpretation remains unreliable. Observing behavior over time creates accuracy. A critical warning closes the chapter. Body language should never be used to accuse, confront, or assume intent. Its value lies in guiding curiosity, not judgment. When used correctly, it helps you ask better questions, listen more carefully, and respond more thoughtfully. Chapter 3 reinforces a central theme of the book. People reveal themselves constantly, but only to those who know how to watch patiently and without assumption. Chapter 4 Facial Expressions, Emotions, and Hidden Reactions. Chapter 4 narrows the focus from full-body signals to the face, where emotions surface most quickly and most briefly. The author explains that while people can rehearse words and manage posture, facial expressions often reveal emotional reactions before conscious control takes over. The chapter begins by clarifying an important distinction. Emotions are fast, expressions are brief. Genuine emotional responses often appear on the face for a fraction of a second before being masked. These fleeting reactions are not dramatic or obvious. They are subtle shifts around the eyes, mouth, and brows. The author introduces the concept of micro-expressions, involuntary facial movements that reflect genuine emotion. These expressions can signal surprise, anger, fear, disgust, sadness, or happiness before the person has time to adjust their face to fit the situation. Micro-expressions are especially valuable when words and behavior suggest something different. However, the author cautions against obsession. Micro-expressions are not proof. They are indicators. One flash of emotion does not reveal intent, but repeated reactions in response to specific topics or people can reveal emotional significance. The chapter explains how emotional leakage occurs. Even when people try to hide feelings, emotions often escape through small facial changes. Tightening of the jaw, compressed lips, raised eyebrows, or sudden blinking can all reflect internal tension. These signs are most meaningful when they appear suddenly or repeatedly. A major emphasis is placed on incongruence. When someone's words say one thing but their facial expression suggests another, attention should increase. Incongruence does not automatically mean deception. It often means internal conflict. A person may be saying yes while feeling hesitation, or expressing confidence while feeling uncertainty. The author also discusses cultural and individual differences. Facial expressiveness varies widely. Some people naturally show emotion more openly. Others are restrained. This reinforces the importance of baselines. What matters is deviation, not comparison to an imagined norm. Another key idea is emotional timing. Genuine emotional reactions occur immediately after a stimulus. Delayed expressions are more likely to be deliberate. Observing when an expression appears can be as important as what it is. The chapter closes by reminding the reader that facial analysis is a tool for empathy, not interrogation. The goal is to understand what someone might be feeling beneath the surface, not to expose or accuse them. When facial expressions are read with patience and humility, they deepen understanding and reduce miscommunication. Used carelessly, they create suspicion. The author emphasizes that responsible analysis always favors curiosity over certainty. Chapter 5. Voice, Tone, and the Hidden Meaning Behind Words. Chapter 5 shifts attention from what people say to how they say it. The author explains that tone of voice often carries more emotional information than the words themselves. While language can be chosen carefully, tone tends to reveal confidence, uncertainty, tension, or intent with far less control. The chapter opens with a key insight: words carry content, tone carries emotion. Two people can say the same sentence and communicate entirely different messages depending on pace, volume, pitch, and rhythm. Human brains are highly sensitive to vocal cues because tone evolved as a survival signal long before complex language. The author breaks down several vocal elements that matter in people analysis. Pitch often rises with nervousness, excitement, or defensiveness, and lowers with calm or authority. Sudden changes in pitch during certain topics can indicate emotional engagement or stress. What matters most is not the pitch itself, but inconsistency. Speed of speech is another strong indicator. Rapid speech can suggest anxiety, eagerness, or an attempt to maintain control of the conversation. Slower speech may indicate calm confidence, fatigue, or careful self-monitoring. Sudden acceleration or slowing is often more meaningful than a steady pace. The chapter also explores pauses and hesitation. Strategic pauses can signal thoughtfulness or emphasis, but unexpected pauses, filler words, or broken sentences may reflect uncertainty or internal conflict. Again, context matters. Some people naturally pause more than others. Volume is discussed as a reflection of emotional state. Speaking louder can signal confidence, dominance, or agitation. Speaking more quietly can suggest caution, intimacy, or insecurity. A noticeable shift in volume during specific moments often reveals emotional significance. One of the most important concepts introduced is vocal congruence. When tone aligns with words, communication feels natural. When tone contradicts words, listeners experience discomfort even if they can't explain why. This discomfort is often the mind registering emotional mismatch. The author stresses that vocal cues should not be used to accuse someone of lying. Inconsistency in tone usually indicates emotion, not deception. A person may feel nervous, conflicted, or pressured without intending to mislead. The chapter also highlights listening habits. Many people focus so much on what they want to say next that they miss tonal shifts entirely. Effective people analysis requires listening without interruption and noticing changes over time. The chapter closes by reinforcing a central rule of the book: behavior is layered. Words, tone, body language, and facial expression work together. When several layers align, understanding increases. When they diverge, curiosity should replace certainty. Learning to hear what tone reveals allows conversations to be calmer, clearer, and more responsive. It helps you respond to emotion, not just information. Chapter 6. Detecting Deception Without Jumping to Conclusions. Chapter 6 addresses one of the most sensitive and frequently misunderstood topics in people analysis: deception. The author is careful to dismantle the fantasy that lies can be detected through a single gesture, phrase, or behavior. There is no universal sign of lying. What exists instead are signals of cognitive and emotional strain. The chapter begins with a crucial reframing. Deception is not the same as dishonesty. People conceal, edit, exaggerate, or omit information for many reasons: fear, privacy, social pressure, embarrassment, or self-protection. The goal of analysis is not to label someone a liar, but to recognize when something requires closer attention. The author explains that deception creates mental load. Telling the truth relies on memory. Lying requires construction, monitoring, and consistency. This extra effort often leaks through behavior, not because people are bad at lying, but because the brain is busy. One common indicator discussed is inconsistency. When details shift over time, timelines blur, or explanations subtly change, it may indicate fabrication or uncertainty. However, the author stresses that memory itself is imperfect. Stress, emotion, and time can also distort recall. Patterns matter more than isolated mistakes. The chapter explores verbal indicators of strain. overly complex explanations, excessive justification, or rehearsed-sounding language can suggest someone is trying to manage perception rather than communicate naturally. On the other hand, very short or evasive answers may indicate avoidance. Again, baseline behavior is essential. Nonverbal leakage is discussed carefully. Sudden changes in posture, increased self-touching, altered breathing, or facial tension may signal discomfort. But discomfort does not equal deception. It signals emotional activation. The key question is, why? The author emphasizes timing. Genuine reactions tend to appear immediately after a stimulus. Delayed reactions often suggest conscious control. If tension appears only after a response is given, it may indicate internal evaluation of what was just said. Another important concept is topic sensitivity. People often show stress only when specific subjects arise. This pattern is more informative than general nervousness. A person may be calm throughout a conversation but become tense around one detail. That detail deserves attention. The chapter strongly warns against confirmation bias. Once people suspect deception, they interpret everything as proof. Effective analysis requires the opposite approach, holding multiple explanations at once and resisting certainty. The author also points out that honest people can look deceptive, especially when anxious, introverted, or under pressure. Conversely, practiced deceivers can appear relaxed. This is why people analysis should never replace evidence or dialogue. The chapter closes with a principle that runs through the entire book. Observation should lead to better questions, not accusations. When something feels off, the most effective response is curiosity, clarification, and patience. True insight does not come from catching people. It comes from understanding what they are trying to protect. Chapter 7. Understanding Habits, Routines, and Behavioral Consistency. Chapter 7 focuses on one of the most reliable windows into human behavior, habits. The author explains that while people can manage impressions in short interactions, habits reveal who someone is over time. Routines form when behavior is repeated without conscious thought, making them difficult to fake and valuable to observe. The chapter opens with an important clarification. Habits are not just actions, they are expressions of priorities and comfort zones. How a person starts their day, manages time, reacts to interruptions, and handles responsibility all reflect underlying values and coping strategies. The author explains that habits develop as solutions. People repeat behaviors that reduce stress, save energy, or produce reward. Once a behavior works, the brain prefers to reuse it rather than evaluate new options. This efficiency makes habits stable and predictable. From an analytical perspective, consistency matters more than content. A habit does not need to be impressive or problematic to be revealing. Small behaviors repeated daily, such as punctuality, organization, avoidance, or over-preparation, offer insight into how a person relates to control, anxiety, and responsibility. The chapter explores time habits in particular. People who arrive early, on time, or late are not simply managing schedules. They are expressing attitudes toward obligation, authority, and structure. Chronic lateness may signal resistance or overcommitment. Chronic punctuality may signal control, respect, or anxiety about evaluation. Context and repetition determine meaning. Another area discussed is stress behavior. Under pressure, people fall back on their strongest habits. Some become hyper-organized. Others procrastinate. Some seek reassurance. Others withdraw. These patterns often emerge consistently across different situations. The author also examines self-soothing habits, such as fidgeting, phone checking, snacking, or repetitive movements. These behaviors often increase during uncertainty or discomfort. Observing when they appear and disappear can reveal emotional triggers. Importantly, the author warns against moralizing habits. A habit is not a flaw or virtue by default. It is an adaptation. Understanding why it exists is more useful than judging it. The chapter highlights that people often underestimate how visible their habits are. While individuals believe they are unpredictable, long-term observers can often anticipate reactions with surprising accuracy. The author closes the chapter by connecting habits to trust. When behavior is consistent, people feel safer and more comfortable. When habits are erratic, others become cautious. Understanding habits helps you predict behavior, adjust expectations, and communicate more effectively. Habits are the long exposure photograph of personality. They show what brief encounters hide. Chapter 8. Emotional Intelligence and Reading Emotional States. Chapter 8 brings together many of the book's earlier ideas and places them under one central skill: emotional intelligence. The author explains that analyzing people effectively is not just about spotting signals, but about understanding emotional states as they unfold in real time. The chapter begins by defining emotional intelligence as the ability to recognize emotions in yourself and others, understand what those emotions signal, and respond appropriately. This skill is not about control or manipulation. It is about alignment. When emotional states are read accurately, communication becomes smoother and conflict decreases. The author emphasizes that emotions are informational, not irrational. Every emotion points to something that matters to the person experiencing it. Anxiety signals perceived risk. Anger signals perceived injustice or boundary violation. Sadness signals loss. Curiosity signals engagement. When emotions are dismissed or ignored, misunderstandings multiply. A key insight of the chapter is that people often react to emotions, not situations. Two individuals can face the same circumstance and respond completely differently depending on emotional interpretation. Effective analysis focuses less on what happened and more on what it meant to the person. The chapter explores emotional intensity. Strong emotions narrow attention and reduce flexibility. When someone is emotionally overwhelmed, logical arguments rarely land. The author explains that recognizing emotional intensity allows you to adjust timing and approach. Sometimes understanding must come before problem solving. Another important topic is emotional masking. Many people learn to hide emotions they believe are unacceptable. Calm expressions can conceal anxiety. Politeness can conceal resentment. Humor can conceal discomfort. The author reminds readers that masking does not remove emotion, it only displaces it. The chapter also discusses emotional contagion. Emotions spread quickly in groups through tone, posture, and facial cues. Being emotionally intelligent means noticing when you are absorbing someone else's emotional state and deciding whether to mirror it or remain grounded. Self-awareness plays a central role here. The author notes that people who struggle to read others often struggle to read themselves. Unacknowledged emotions distort perception. If you are defensive, you see threat everywhere. If you are anxious, you see danger everywhere. Emotional clarity improves accuracy. The chapter introduces the idea of emotional calibration. Instead of reacting automatically, emotionally intelligent people pause, name what they are sensing, and choose a response. This pause creates space between stimulus and reaction. The chapter closes by reinforcing that emotional intelligence is not about being agreeable or soft. It is about being accurate. When you understand emotional states clearly, you can respond with firmness, empathy, or distance as needed. People are most predictable when emotions are understood, and most confusing when emotions are ignored. Chapter 9. Power Dynamics, Status, and Social Behavior. Chapter 9 examines how power and status shape human behavior, often more strongly than personality or intention. The author explains that people rarely behave the same way across all social contexts because power dynamics subtly influence posture, speech, confidence, and decision-making. The chapter opens by defining power broadly. Power is not limited to job titles or authority. It includes social influence, expertise, confidence, control of resources, and even emotional leverage. Whenever one person believes another can reward or punish them, power is present. One of the key insights is that status changes behavior immediately. When people feel higher status, they tend to take up more space, speak more freely, interrupt more, and show less facial restraint. When people feel lower status, they often become cautious, quieter, more agreeable, and more controlled. These shifts usually happen unconsciously. The author emphasizes that power reveals tendencies rather than creating them. A generous person with power becomes more generous. A controlling person becomes more controlling. Power removes constraints, allowing underlying traits to surface more clearly. The chapter also explores how people signal status non-verbally. Relaxed posture, slower movements, fewer self-soothing gestures, and comfortable silence often signal confidence or authority. Conversely, excessive nodding, nervous laughter, rushed speech, and frequent justification often signal perceived lower status. An important concept introduced is status sensitivity. Some people are highly attuned to hierarchy and adjust behavior constantly depending on who is present. Others remain relatively consistent regardless of status. Neither is inherently better, but awareness of this difference improves interpretation. The author also discusses how people behave around authority figures. Compliance, flattery, defensiveness, or overperformance often reflect fear rather than respect. Understanding this helps prevent misjudging sincerity. Another key theme is false confidence. Dominant behavior does not always indicate true security. Some people display exaggerated confidence to mask insecurity. This often shows up as excessive control, intolerance of disagreement, or defensiveness when challenged. The chapter highlights that power can distort perception. People in higher status positions often underestimate how their words and actions affect others. People in lower status positions often overinterpret signals. Effective analysis accounts for this asymmetry. The chapter closes with a practical takeaway. Understanding power dynamics allows you to separate behavior driven by personality from behavior driven by position. When context changes, behavior often changes with it. To analyze people accurately, you must always ask, who holds power here, and how does that shape what I'm seeing? Chapter 10, Manipulation, Influence, and Psychological Control. Chapter 10 tackles a topic many readers are curious about but often misunderstand: manipulation. The author is careful to draw a clear line between influence and manipulation, explaining that while all social interaction involves influence, manipulation is influence that removes choice. The chapter begins by defining manipulation as behavior designed to push someone toward a decision that benefits the manipulator while hiding that intention. Unlike open persuasion, manipulation relies on emotional pressure, confusion, guilt, fear, or obligation. The manipulated person believes they are choosing freely, but the options have been quietly narrowed. One of the first warning signs discussed is emotional leverage. Manipulators often exploit emotions such as guilt, loyalty, fear of abandonment, or desire for approval. Statements that imply obligation, disappointment, or moral failure are common tools. The author stresses that manipulation often feels subtle, not aggressive. The chapter examines gaslighting, a form of manipulation where a person undermines another's perception of reality. This can include denying past statements, minimizing emotions, or reframing events in ways that create self-doubt. Over time, the target begins to question their own judgment and rely more on the manipulator's version of events. Another technique explored is false urgency. Creating artificial pressure limits time for reflection and increases compliance. Phrases that suggest now or never. Decisions are designed to bypass rational evaluation. The author also discusses reciprocity traps, where small favors are used to create a sense of obligation that is later exploited. While reciprocity is a normal social rule, manipulators use it strategically rather than sincerely. A key insight of the chapter is that manipulation succeeds when boundaries are unclear. People who struggle to say no, fear conflict, or prioritize harmony at any cost are more vulnerable. Manipulation is rarely about intelligence. It is about emotional access. The author emphasizes that detecting manipulation is not about becoming suspicious of everyone. It is about noticing patterns. Repeated pressure, disregard for boundaries, and consistent benefit flowing in one direction are strong indicators. The chapter closes with practical guidance. The most effective defense against manipulation is clarity. Clarify intentions, clarify boundaries, slow decisions down. Ask direct questions. Manipulation loses power when exposed to calm scrutiny. Understanding manipulation is not about controlling others. It is about protecting your ability to choose freely. Chapter 11. Communication Styles and How People Reveal Themselves in Conversation. Chapter 11 focuses on everyday conversation as one of the richest sources of behavioral information. The author explains that people reveal far more through how they communicate than through what they intend to communicate. Conversation style reflects confidence, insecurity, control needs, openness, and emotional boundaries. The chapter begins with a simple observation: communication is never neutral. Every person brings habits into conversation that shape how they listen, respond, interrupt, or withdraw. These habits are usually unconscious, which makes them reliable indicators of personality and emotional state. One major distinction explored is expressive versus restrained communicators. Expressive communicators speak freely, share personal details, use storytelling, and think out loud. Restrained communicators are more selective, concise, and controlled. Misunderstandings often arise when expressive people assume restraint means disinterest, or when restrained people assume expressiveness means lack of discipline. The author then examines listening behavior, which is often more revealing than speaking. People who listen actively, ask clarifying questions, and respond to emotional cues tend to value connection and understanding. People who interrupt, redirect, or wait impatiently for their turn often prioritize control, validation, or efficiency. Another key pattern discussed is conversational dominance. Some individuals consistently steer conversations back to themselves, their experiences, or their opinions. This does not always indicate narcissism. It can reflect anxiety, need for reassurance, or learned habits from competitive environments. Repetition over time is what gives meaning. The chapter also explores avoidant communication. Avoidant communicators change topics, use humor to deflect, give vague answers, or minimize issues. This style often develops as a way to reduce conflict or emotional exposure. Understanding this prevents misreading avoidance as dishonesty or indifference. Tone alignment is revisited here. When someone responds emotionally in a way that does not match the situation, such as joking during serious topics or becoming intense during minor ones, it often signals discomfort. These mismatches are clues to underlying emotional boundaries. The author emphasizes the importance of response timing. Immediate responses may reflect comfort or impulsivity. Delayed responses may indicate caution, internal conflict, or self-monitoring. What matters most is consistency within the individual's normal pattern. A particularly valuable insight in this chapter is that communication style is often situationally adaptive. People may speak confidently in familiar settings and become guarded in unfamiliar ones. Accurate analysis considers environment, power dynamics, and emotional stakes. The chapter closes with a practical reminder. Good people analysis improves communication when it leads to adjustment, not judgment. Understanding how someone communicates allows you to choose clarity, patience, or firmness as needed. Conversation is not just exchange of information. It is a live display of how a person relates to the world. Chapter 12. Analyzing Relationships and Interpersonal Dynamics. Chapter 12 zooms out from individual behavior and focuses on relationships as systems. The author explains that people rarely act in isolation. Their behavior shifts depending on who they are with, what roles exist, and what emotional history is present. To analyze people accurately, you must analyze interactions, not just individuals. The chapter opens with a key idea: relationships create patterns. Over time, people fall into familiar roles with one another, such as the leader, the caretaker, the mediator, the critic, or the dependent. These roles are often unspoken, but they strongly influence how each person behaves. The author emphasizes that behavior in relationships is reciprocal. One person's actions invite certain responses. A controlling person often attracts passive behavior. A highly accommodating person may invite dominance. These dynamics persist, not because either person consciously chooses them, but because they stabilize the relationship. One of the most important concepts introduced is emotional roles. In many relationships, one person consistently expresses emotion while the other suppresses it. One worries while the other avoids. One pursues while the other withdraws. These patterns create balance, but often at the cost of frustration or misunderstanding. The chapter explores conflict patterns in depth. Some relationships externalize conflict through argument and confrontation. Others internalize it through silence, sarcasm, or distance. Neither approach is inherently healthier. What matters is whether conflict leads to resolution or repetition. The author also discusses power balance in relationships. Power does not always come from dominance. Sometimes it comes from emotional withdrawal, unpredictability, or control of affection. Understanding who adjusts more in a relationship often reveals where power truly lies. Another key topic is dependency versus interdependence. Healthy relationships allow both individuals to maintain autonomy while cooperating. Unhealthy dynamics often involve emotional reliance, where one person's stability depends on the other's behavior. This creates pressure and imbalance. The chapter highlights how past experiences shape relational behavior. People bring expectations from previous relationships into new ones, often unconsciously. Someone who was betrayed may test loyalty repeatedly. Someone who was ignored may seek constant reassurance. Recognizing these carryovers increases empathy and accuracy. The author also warns against analyzing relationships only through moments of harmony or conflict. What matters most is behavior during stress, change, or disagreement. These moments reveal the true structure of the dynamic. The chapter closes with a practical insight. Understanding relationship dynamics allows you to stop personalizing behavior that is systemic. Not every reaction is about you. Often, it is about the role you occupy in someone else's emotional pattern. To analyze people deeply, you must watch how they connect, adjust, and respond together. Relationships reveal what individuals alone may hide. Chapter 13. Using People Analysis Ethically and Wisely. The final chapter brings the book to a grounded conclusion. After teaching how to observe, interpret, and understand human behavior, the author turns to the most important question of all: how this knowledge should be used. The chapter opens with a clear warning. People analysis is powerful, and power without ethics quickly becomes manipulation. Understanding behavior gives you influence, whether you intend it or not. The responsibility lies in choosing how that influence is applied. The author emphasizes that the goal of people analysis is clarity, not control. When used ethically, it improves communication, reduces conflict, and deepens empathy. When misused, it becomes a tool for dominance, deception, or emotional exploitation. The difference lies in intention. A major theme of this chapter is respect for autonomy. Every person has the right to their thoughts, emotions, and boundaries. Analyzing someone does not give permission to override their choices or push them toward outcomes that benefit you alone. Ethical analysis always preserves the other person's ability to choose. The author revisits a recurring idea from earlier chapters. Understanding does not require agreement. You can recognize why someone behaves a certain way without excusing harmful behavior. Clarity allows you to respond firmly without becoming reactive. Another key point is humility. No analysis is ever complete. People change, context shifts, internal states evolve. Assuming certainty about someone else's motives or character is one of the fastest ways to become inaccurate. Ethical analysis remains flexible and open to correction. The chapter also encourages using people analysis internally as much as externally. The most valuable application is self-awareness. Recognizing your own patterns, emotional triggers, biases, and habits improves every interaction. When you understand yourself better, you project less and listen more accurately. The author stresses that not every insight needs to be acted on. Sometimes the most ethical response is restraint. You may notice insecurity, fear, or manipulation, but choosing patience, distance, or silence can be wiser than confrontation. The chapter closes by reframing people analysis as a lifelong practice rather than a skill to master. Human behavior is complex, layered, and shaped by countless variables. The aim is not perfection, but improvement. Used wisely, people analysis makes interactions calmer and more humane. It replaces confusion with understanding and reaction with choice. It helps you navigate the social world without losing integrity. The final message is simple and grounded. Understand people not to control them, but to relate to them more clearly, honestly, and responsibly. Conclusion from the book. How to Analyze People closes with a quiet but important reminder. Understanding human behavior is not about certainty, shortcuts, or control. It is about attention. Throughout the book, one idea repeats in different forms. People are always communicating, but rarely in simple or obvious ways. Behavior, tone, habits, emotions, and context work together to reveal what words often hide. The book emphasizes patience over judgment. Accurate analysis requires time, patterns, and humility. No single gesture proves anything. No single conversation defines a person. Meaning emerges only when observation is calm and consistent. At its core, the book teaches responsibility. Learning to analyze people means learning when to act, when to wait, and when to let things be. Used wisely, this skill reduces conflict, improves communication, and deepens empathy. Used carelessly, it creates suspicion and distance. Understanding people does not make life predictable. It makes it clearer. And clarity, more than certainty, is what allows better decisions and healthier relationships. My reflection conclusion as a summaries creator. While summarizing this book, what stood out most to me was how often people analysis turns back toward the self. The more tools you gain to read others, the more obvious your own biases become. This isn't a book about becoming sharper than everyone else. It's a book about slowing down. Creating this summary reminded me that most misunderstandings are not caused by malice, but by misinterpretation. We rush to conclusions because certainty feels safer than curiosity. This book pushes in the opposite direction. For me, the real value here isn't spotting signals or decoding behavior. It's learning when not to react, when to observe one more moment, when to replace judgment with questions. That shift alone can change how you move through conversations, relationships, and even your inner dialogue. Thank you for listening. If this audiobook challenged how you think, support the work by subscribing, liking, and sharing your thoughts below. Comments shape future content. Stay curious, stay aware, and return for deeper explorations. All the best, and take care of yourselves.